The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III stood at his office window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did on this particular Tuesday in November. Behind him, his private secretary cleared his throat nervously, holding a stack of documents that would soon change everything. "Your Majesty," the secretary began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Parker Bowles family has requested an urgent audience. They're already gathered in the blue drawing room." Charles turned slowly, his face betraying none of the turmoil that churned within him. For months, whispers had echoed through the palace corridors about growing tensions between the royal household and Camilla's extended family. What had started as minor disagreements over protocol had escalated into something far more serious. The Parker Bowles family had always been a complex addition to the royal fold. When Charles married Camilla in 2005, it had been understood that her children and relatives would maintain a respectful distance from the core royal duties. However, as the years passed and Charles ascended to the throne, certain members of Camilla's family began to push boundaries that had been carefully established. Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son, had recently published a memoir that contained intimate details about palace life. Though he claimed the book was merely a collection of food memories and family stories, several passages had caused considerable embarrassment to the royal household. More troubling were the financial arrangements that had quietly been made over the years, allowing various Parker Bowles family members to benefit from their royal connections in ways that violated long-standing protocols. Laura Lopez, Camilla's daughter, had been more discreet, but her husband's business dealings had recently come under scrutiny. Harry Lopez had been using his connection to the royal family to secure lucrative contracts for his art gallery, dropping hints about royal patronage to wealthy clients who were eager to curry favor with the monarchy. The breaking point had come just days earlier when Annabelle Elliott, Camilla's sister and a successful interior designer, had been discovered taking payments for royal consultations, essentially selling access to palace insights, and claiming to represent the royal household's preferences in design matters. The scandal had been kept from the public, but within the palace walls, the situation had reached a crisis point. King Charles had spent sleepless nights wrestling with a decision that would affect not only his marriage, but the very foundation of the modern monarchy. The institution that had survived scandals, divorces, and public relations disasters now faced a more subtle but equally dangerous threat: the appearance that royal connections could be bought and sold. As he made his way through the palace corridors toward the blue drawing room, Charles reflected on his mother's words from years past. Queen Elizabeth II had often spoken about the importance of maintaining the dignity of the crown above all personal considerations. "The monarchy is bigger than any individual," she had reminded him countless times, "even bigger than love." The ornate doors to the blue drawing room loomed before him. Inside, he knew, waited not just Camilla's family, but the future of his reign. The decision he was about to announce would send shockwaves through the royal establishment and potentially strain his marriage to its breaking point. Palace staff members lined the hallway, their faces carefully neutral despite the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding. Never before had a reigning monarch been forced to take such drastic action against his spouse's family. The situation was without precedent in modern royal history. Security personnel had been quietly increased around the palace grounds. The Royal Protection Unit had been briefed on potential scenarios, including the possibility that family members might react poorly to the king's decision. Media management teams were already preparing statements, though they hoped the matter could be resolved without public attention. The Queen Consort herself had been notably absent from recent public engagements, claiming a minor illness. In reality, Camilla had been struggling with the growing rift between her loyalty to her family and her duty to the crown. She had attempted to mediate behind the scenes, but her efforts had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. Royal biographers would later describe this moment as one of the most challenging of Charles's reign, surpassing even the difficulties he faced during his divorce from Diana. Unlike those earlier troubles, which had played out in the public eye, this crisis threatened the very integrity of the modern monarchy's carefully constructed image of dignity and propriety. The king paused at the threshold, straightening his tie and assuming the regal bearing that had been instilled in him since childhood. Whatever happened in the next hour would define his reign and potentially reshape the royal family's relationship with extended relatives forever. Palace insiders had been whispering about this moment for weeks. The usually unflappable royal household staff had been on edge, unsure how to handle the delicate situation. Some had worked for the royal family for decades and had never witnessed such internal family tension reaching the highest levels of the monarchy. The financial implications alone were staggering. Informal arrangements that had allowed Parker Bowles family members to benefit from royal connections had created a web of potential conflicts of interest that threatened to undermine public trust in the institution. The Crown's legal advisors had spent days reviewing contracts, agreements, and financial arrangements that needed to be unwound. As Charles reached for the door handle, he knew that regardless of the outcome, this day would mark a turning point. The easy, informal relationships that had developed over nearly 2 decades of marriage were about to be replaced by the cold formality of royal protocol. The institution would survive, as it always had, but at what personal cost remained to be seen. The blue drawing room fell silent as King Charles entered, his presence immediately commanding attention from the assembled Parker Bowles family members. The room, with its priceless Gainsborough paintings and centuries-old furniture, had witnessed countless royal meetings, but none quite like this one. Tom Parker Bowles sat rigidly in a Louis XVI chair, while his sister Laura perched nervously on the edge of a silk-upholstered settee. Annabel Elliot stood by the window, her usual confident demeanor noticeably shaken. The king took his position behind an antique mahogany desk, a symbolic barrier between himself and Camilla's family. His private secretary remained near the door, ready to document what would undoubtedly become a pivotal moment in royal history. The atmosphere was thick with tension as family members exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that this was no ordinary family discussion. "I have asked you here today," Charles began, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority, "to address matters that have brought the reputation of the crown into question." His words were measured, each syllable carefully pronounced in the manner that had been drilled into him since childhood. There was no warmth in his tone, no acknowledgement of the years of family gatherings and shared celebrations. Tom shifted uncomfortably, knowing that his recent book had likely triggered this confrontation. The memoir, which he had titled Cooking and the Crown, A Family Journey, had seemed harmless enough during the writing process. However, certain passages describing private family dinners at Clarence House and casual conversations with the then Prince of Wales had revealed details that palace officials considered inappropriate for public consumption. The book had included descriptions of Charles's private study, details about his daily routines, and even casual comments about other members of the royal family. What Tom had viewed as charming anecdotes, the palace legal team had identified as potential security risks and breaches of the informal confidentiality that governed all royal relationships. Laura's situation was more complex. Her husband Harry had been leveraging his royal connections for his art gallery business, though always maintaining plausible deniability. Wealthy clients were told that pieces in his collection had been admired by members of the royal household, or that certain artists were favored by royal taste. While technically not claiming official royal endorsement, the implications were clear to potential buyers. The gallery had hosted several high-profile events where Harry would casually mention family dinners at royal residences or share seemingly innocent stories about royal art preferences. These conversations had helped him secure sales worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, creating a situation where royal access was being monetized, even if indirectly. Annabel's transgressions were perhaps the most serious. As a successful interior designer, she had begun offering royal-style consultations to wealthy clients, claiming intimate knowledge of royal preferences and decorating standards. Her business had marketed these services as providing authentic royal luxury based on her unique insider access to palace aesthetics. Worse still, she had been photographing royal interiors during family visits and using these images as inspiration for client projects. While she never published the photos directly, elements from private royal residences had appeared in her design work, creating an uncomfortable commercialization of royal privacy. The King's investigation had revealed financial records showing payments of over £2 million to Annabel's firm for these specialized consultations. Wealthy Americans and Middle Eastern clients had paid premium fees for the perceived connection to royal taste and lifestyle. "Each of you," Charles continued, his gaze moving methodically from one family member to the next, "has violated the trust that was extended when you became part of this family through marriage. The monarchy exists on the foundation of public trust, and that trust has been compromised by your actions." The room remained silent except for the ticking of an ornate clock that had belonged to George III. Family members who had grown accustomed to the privileges and access that came with royal connections now faced the reality that those privileges came with responsibilities they had failed to honor. Tom finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, I never intended any harm. The book was simply meant to share my love of cooking and family memories." His attempt at explanation sounded weak even to his own ears. The man who had built a successful career as a food critic and author now found himself struggling for words. "Intent," Charles replied coldly, "is irrelevant when the outcome damages the crown. Your book contains information that compromises security protocols and violates the privacy that is essential to royal function. More importantly, it represents a commercialization of your family connection that is entirely unacceptable." Laura spoke next, her voice barely audible. "We never claimed official endorsement. Harry was simply sharing his personal experiences." But even as she said the words, she knew how inadequate they sounded. The line between personal experience and commercial exploitation had been crossed repeatedly. The king's response was swift and decisive. Personal experiences become commercial assets when they generate profit through royal association. Your husband's business has benefited substantially from connections that were granted in good faith as family privileges, not commercial opportunities. Annabelle, who had remained silent until this point, finally attempted her own defense. "My work has always maintained the highest standards. I've never claimed to represent the royal household officially." Her words carried none of her usual confidence. "You have charged substantial fees specifically for royal insights and used private royal spaces as inspiration for commercial projects," Charles stated flatly. "This represents a fundamental breach of the trust that allowed you access to those spaces as a family member." The implications of the king's words were becoming clear. This was not a discussion about modifying behavior or establishing new guidelines. This was a formal severance of the informal relationships that had developed over years of marriage and family integration. Palace legal advisors had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Contracts would need to be unwound, financial arrangements terminated, and access privileges formally revoked. The family members in the room were about to discover that royal connection, once severed, could not easily be restored. The weight of tradition and protocol that governed royal relationships was about to reassert itself with full force. Years of casual family interactions were about to be replaced by the formal distance that historically separated the monarch from extended family members who were not direct heirs to the throne. Outside the blue drawing room, palace staff continued their duties, but the tension was palpable throughout the building. This confrontation would reshape not only the Parker Bowles family's relationship with the crown, but also establish new precedents for how royal connections could and could not be utilized. The modern monarchy's careful balance between accessibility and dignity was being recalibrated in real time, with Camilla's family serving as an example of where the lines could not be crossed. King Charles reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a formal document bearing the royal seal. The heavy cream paper rustled in the silent room as he unfolded it, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. The assembled Parker Bowles family members watched with growing dread as they realized this was not merely a family discussion, but a formal royal pronouncement. "By royal decree," Charles began, his voice taking on the ceremonial tone reserved for official proclamations. "Effective immediately, all informal privileges and access granted to extended family members through marriage are hereby revoked." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, their legal and personal implications becoming clear to everyone present. Tom Parker Bowles felt his stomach drop as the reality hit him. Years of casual invitations to state dinners, private family gatherings at royal residences, and insider access to royal events were ending in this single moment. The book advance he had received was substantial, but now he faced the prospect of legal action and potential demands for financial restitution. The decree continued with devastating precision. All commercial arrangements, business relationships, and financial benefits derived from royal association must be terminated within 30 days. Legal counsel will be provided to ensure proper dissolution of contracts and agreements that may have been established through inappropriate use of royal connections. Laura's face had gone pale as she realized the implications for her husband's gallery business. Harry had several major contracts pending that were largely dependent on the perceived royal connection. Canceling these deals would result in significant financial losses and likely damage his reputation in the art world permanently. Annabelle understood that her interior design business was about to lose its most lucrative service offering. The royal consultation fees had become a major source of income, and Wealthy clients had specifically sought her services based on her royal family connection. Without that association, she would need to rebuild her business model entirely. Charles continued reading from the decree, each word carefully crafted by royal legal advisors to ensure complete legal protection for the monarchy. Security clearances for palace access are immediately suspended. Personal items stored at royal residences must be collected within 7 days under supervised conditions. The personal impact was perhaps even more devastating than the professional consequences. Christmas celebrations at Sandringham, Easter gatherings at Windsor Castle, and informal weekend visits to Highgrove House were all ending. The family traditions that had developed over 2 decades of marriage were being severed by royal protocol. Furthermore, the king continued, any future public statements, interviews, or publications that reference royal family connections must be submitted for prior approval through the Crown's legal representatives. Unauthorized use of royal associations will result in immediate legal action. Tom realized that his publishing career was now under royal oversight. Any future books, articles, or media appearances would need to navigate the complex web of royal approval processes. His independence as a writer and food critic had been effectively curtailed by his own poor judgment in the memoir. The decree also addressed financial restitution. Profits derived from inappropriate commercialization of royal connections are subject to review and potential recovery through civil proceedings. Financial records related to such activities must be made available for royal audit within 14 days. Annabelle's design business faced not only the loss of future royal-related income, but potentially the seizure of past profits that had been earned through royal association. The £2 million in consultation fees she had received could be subject to clawback provisions, threatening her financial stability. The room's atmosphere grew heavier as Charles moved to the most personal aspects of the decree. Invitations to royal events, including state functions, family celebrations, and private gatherings, are indefinitely suspended pending demonstration of renewed commitment to appropriate conduct and discretion. Laura burst into tears as she realized that her children's relationship with their step-grandfather was being formally severed. Family birthdays, school events, and childhood milestones would no longer include the royal grandfather who had been a significant presence in their lives. The king's tone softened slightly as he addressed this personal dimension. This decision brings me no pleasure, but the integrity of the crown must supersede all personal considerations. The monarchy serves the people of the Commonwealth, and that service cannot be compromised by family relationships. Tom attempted one final appeal. Your Majesty, surely there must be some way to address these concerns without such drastic measures. We're family, after all. His voice carried a desperate hope that family bonds might override institutional requirements. Charles's response was immediate and final. Family relationships within the royal context are defined by duty and service to the crown. When those obligations are abandoned for personal gain, the relationship itself becomes untenable. There was genuine sadness in his voice, but his resolve remained absolute. The decree included specific protocols for future interactions. Any communication with royal household members would need to follow formal channels. Casual phone calls, text messages, and informal visits were prohibited. Even emergency family situations would require official approval through the Royal Private Secretary's office. Palace staff had already begun implementing the new restrictions. Security codes had been changed, access cards deactivated, and personal belongings collected from various royal residences. The efficiency with which these changes had been executed demonstrated that this decision had been planned meticulously. The financial implications extended beyond direct profits. Investment opportunities that had been available through royal connections, charitable board positions that carried social prestige, and business partnerships that relied on royal association were all affected by the decree. Annabelle's husband, Simon Elliot, would lose his position on several charitable boards where royal patronage had been instrumental in his appointment. These roles had provided valuable networking opportunities that contributed significantly to the family's social and financial status. The decree also addressed media relations. Any unauthorized interviews, statements to press, or social media posts referencing this matter or ongoing royal family relationships will be considered breaches of privacy agreements and subject to legal action. Tom's established relationships with food magazines and television producers would now require careful navigation. His royal connections had been a significant part of his public persona, and removing that association would require rebuilding his professional identity. The meeting was approaching its conclusion, but the long-term implications were just beginning to unfold. Legal teams would spend months unwinding the complex web of relationships and agreements that had developed over years of informal family integration. As Charles prepared to leave the room, he paused at the door. This institution has survived for over 1,000 years because it places duty above personal interest. Today's decision ensures that it will continue to serve future generations with integrity intact. The Parker Bowles family members remained seated in stunned silence as the king departed, leaving them to contemplate the complete transformation of their lives that had just been decreed. In the private apartments of Clarence House, Queen Consort Camilla sat in her favorite armchair, staring at the formal document that had just been delivered by the king's private secretary. The royal decree that had devastated her family now lay before her, its official language and royal seal representing the complete transformation of her world. The woman who had waited decades to marry Charles now faced the possibility that her loyalty to family might cost her everything she had gained. The telephone had been ringing incessantly since news of the decree had reached her children and sister. Tom had called first, his voice breaking as he described the meeting in the blue drawing room. Laura had followed with tearful questions about what this meant for her children's relationship with their step-grandfather. Annabelle's call had been the most difficult, filled with anger and accusations about Camilla's failure to protect her family from royal retribution. Palace staff moved quietly through the residence, their usual cheerful greetings replaced by respectful nods and carefully neutral expressions. Even the most senior household members, who had served the family for years, seemed uncertain about how to navigate this unprecedented situation. The informal warmth that had characterized Camilla's household was rapidly being replaced by the rigid formality of royal protocol. Charles had not returned to their private apartments since the morning meeting. His absence spoke volumes about the strain this decision had placed on their marriage. For the first time since their wedding, Camilla felt truly alone in the vast machinery of royal life. The support system of family connections that had helped her navigate the complexities of royal duty was gone, leaving her isolated in a world governed by centuries-old traditions and expectations. The media management team had already begun preparing statements, though they hoped to contain the situation without public disclosure. Royal correspondents had started making inquiries about unusual activity at the palace and the sudden absence of Parker Bowles family members from recent royal events. The careful balance between transparency and privacy that governed royal media relations was being tested by this internal family crisis. Camilla's personal secretary brought tea and attempted to provide comfort, but the magnitude of the situation was beyond consolation. The queen consort faced an impossible choice between supporting her family and maintaining her position within the royal hierarchy. Years of careful integration into royal life were being challenged by the actions of people she loved but could no longer publicly defend. The financial implications for her family were staggering, but the personal cost to Camilla was even greater. Christmas traditions that had brought joy to her grandchildren were ending. Family celebrations that had helped humanize the royal experience were being replaced by formal gatherings dictated by protocol. The natural warmth that had been one of her greatest contributions to royal life was being systematically dismantled. Constitutional experts would later debate whether Camilla had any legal recourse or formal avenue for appeal. As queen consort, her position was entirely dependent on her marriage to the king. Unlike blood relatives who held hereditary positions, her status within the royal family was tied directly to her personal relationship with Charles. Challenging his decision would risk not only her family relationships, but potentially her own position. The precedent being established would affect future royal marriages and family relationships for generations. The informal integration of extended family members that had characterized modern royal life was being replaced by strict adherence to traditional protocols that had governed the monarchy for centuries. Camilla's situation was creating new boundaries that would define how royal marriages could function in the contemporary world. Private conversations with Charles had become increasingly difficult as the weight of royal duty pressed against personal relationships. The man she had loved for decades was transforming before her eyes into the institutional monarch that duty demanded. The informal husband who had supported her through years of public scrutiny was being replaced by the king, who served constitutional requirements above all personal considerations. Camilla's royal diary, once filled with joint engagements and family events, was being systematically revised. Public appearances that had included family members were being restructured. Charitable patronages that had involved her sister and children were being transferred to other members of the royal family. The careful balance of public and private life that had sustained her was being redrawn entirely. The Queen Consort staff faced their own challenges as they navigated the changing protocols. Long-standing arrangements for family communications, travel coordination, and event planning were being replaced by formal procedures that required royal approval for activities that had previously been handled informally. The efficiency and warmth that had characterized Camilla's household operations were being constrained by new security and protocol requirements. Legal advisors presented Camilla with her own set of documents requiring review and signature. As Queen Consort, she needed to formally acknowledge the new restrictions and confirm her understanding of the revised protocols governing family relationships. The legal language was carefully crafted to protect both the monarchy and her personal position, but it effectively ended the informal family integration that had been central to her happiness. Camilla's charitable work, which had been one of her most successful contributions to royal life, faced significant reorganization. Several of her patronages had included family members in supporting roles, and these arrangements needed to be restructured. The personal networks that had helped her establish effective charitable relationships were being severed, requiring her to rebuild these important connections under formal royal oversight. The international implications were also becoming clear. State visits and diplomatic functions that had included extended family members would need to be restructured. Foreign dignitaries who had expected to meet with the broader royal family circle would encounter the more formal and restricted access that historical protocol demanded. The modernization of royal engagement that Camilla had helped foster was being reversed. As evening approached, Camilla remained alone in her private sitting room, surrounded by photographs of family gatherings that now represented a closed chapter of her life. The grandmother who had delighted in sharing royal experiences with her grandchildren was being forced to maintain formal distance. The sister who had shared confidences and celebrations was now effectively a stranger under royal protocol. The support letters from friends and allies outside the royal family provided some comfort, but they also highlighted Camilla's growing isolation within the institution she had worked so hard to serve. The balancing act between personal relationships and royal duty that had defined her position was being resolved decisively in favor of institutional requirements. Phone calls to the king's private office went unanswered as Charles maintained the separation necessary for institutional decision-making. The personal relationship that had sustained both of them through decades of public scrutiny was being subordinated to the constitutional requirements of monarchy. Camilla faced the reality that her role as queen consort might require sacrifices she had never fully contemplated. The evening news broadcasts made no mention of the internal palace drama, but royal watchers had begun noticing the absence of Parker Bowles' family members from recent events. Speculation about health issues and scheduling conflicts would only provide cover for so long before more probing questions emerged about the fundamental changes occurring within the royal household. 3 weeks after the decree was issued, King Charles stood once again at his office window, but the view seemed different now. The gardens of Buckingham Palace appeared more formal, more distant, reflecting the transformation that had occurred within the royal household. The decision that had torn his family apart was now being vindicated by early indicators of public and institutional response, though the personal cost remained heavy on his conscience. Parliamentary officials had quietly commended the decisive action taken to protect the monarchy's integrity. Constitutional scholars were already analyzing the precedent as a masterful example of institutional preservation over personal interest. The monarchy's reputation for placing duty above family considerations had been reinforced in a way that strengthened public trust in the institution's fundamental values. Media coverage had been carefully managed through strategic briefings that emphasized the king's commitment to constitutional principles without revealing specific family details. Royal correspondents reported on a streamlining of royal household protocols and renewed focus on core constitutional duties, without mentioning the Parker Bowles situation directly. The palace's media strategy had successfully framed the changes as positive modernization rather than family crisis. Financial markets had responded positively to indicators of stronger royal oversight and governance. International investors viewed the decisive action as evidence of institutional stability and proper risk management within the monarchy. The economic implications of royal reputation were significant in terms of tourism, trade relationships, and Britain's soft power internationally. Tom Parker Bowles had begun the painful process of rebuilding his career identity without royal associations. His publisher had agreed to revise future marketing materials and remove royal references from promotional activities related to his memoir. The book's sales had actually increased due to curiosity about the royal connections, but Tom understood that this temporary attention came at the cost of long-term family relationships. Laura and Harry Lopez faced more substantial challenges as they worked to restructure their art gallery business. Several major contracts had been canceled when clients learned that royal associations were no longer valid. However, some relationships had proven genuine enough to survive the loss of royal connection, providing a foundation for rebuilding their business on more authentic grounds. Annabelle Elliott's interior design firm required the most comprehensive reorganization. The royal consultation services had been completely discontinued, and client contracts needed extensive revision to remove any implications of royal endorsement. Surprisingly, her core design skills proved strong enough to sustain the business, though at a significantly reduced scale and profitability. The financial audits had been completed more quickly than expected, revealing that while profits from royal associations were substantial, they were not fraudulent in any legal sense. The family members had operated in gray areas of propriety rather than criminal violations. This finding allowed for negotiated settlements rather than punitive legal action, though substantial restitution payments were still required. Queen Consort Camilla had emerged from her period of private reflection with renewed commitment to her constitutional role. The personal cost had been enormous, but she had reached an understanding with Charles that their marriage and her royal duties could survive this crisis if they maintained absolute commitment to institutional requirements over family preferences. Camilla's first public appearance after the family crisis had been carefully orchestrated to demonstrate strength and continuity. Her engagement with the children's literacy charity showed no signs of the personal turmoil she had experienced. Royal watchers noted a new formality in her demeanor that suggested complete integration with traditional royal protocols. Private conversations between Charles and Camilla had been difficult, but ultimately strengthening for their marriage. The crisis had forced them to confront fundamental questions about the nature of royal service and personal sacrifice that many couples never face. Their relationship had been tested and refined by the institutional pressures that governed their lives. The broader royal family had rallied around the king's decision once they understood the full implications of the situation. Prince William and Catherine had privately expressed support for the decisive action, recognizing that their own future reign would benefit from the clear precedents being established about family relationships and commercial exploitation. Palace staff had adapted to the new protocols with remarkable efficiency, demonstrating the institution's capacity for self-preservation and adaptation. The temporary disruption caused by implementing new security and access procedures had been resolved without affecting the core functions of royal operations. International diplomatic relations had actually been enhanced by the demonstration of strong institutional governance. Foreign governments appreciated working with a monarchy that maintained clear boundaries and professional standards. Several ambassadors had privately commended the decision as evidence of modern royal leadership. Charitable organizations that had benefited from Parker Bowles' family involvement were reassigned to other royal patrons without significant disruption. The transition demonstrated the monarchy's depth of resources and commitment to maintaining charitable relationships despite internal changes. The legal framework established by this crisis created new guidelines for future royal marriages and family integration. Clear protocols now existed for commercial activities, media relationships, and financial arrangements involving extended royal family members. These guidelines would help prevent similar situations from developing in future generations. Security arrangements had been simplified by the reduced number of individuals requiring royal protection. The cost savings and operational efficiency gained from the new restrictions provided practical benefits that justified the personal costs involved in implementing them. Royal household finances benefited from the elimination of informal arrangements and the establishment of clear boundaries around royal resources. The accountability and transparency gained through this process strengthened the monarchy's position with Parliament and public oversight bodies. As the immediate crisis passed, attention turned to long-term implications for royal family relationships. The precedent established would influence how future monarchs balanced personal relationships with institutional requirements. The modern monarchy had demonstrated its ability to evolve and adapt while maintaining core constitutional principles. Charles reflected on letters from Commonwealth leaders who had expressed support for his decision. The global monarchy that he led required consistent standards and clear boundaries that transcended individual relationships. The decision that had seemed so personally devastating was being recognized internationally as necessary institutional leadership. The Christmas season approached with new protocols governing family celebrations. Traditional gatherings would continue, but with formal restrictions that maintained appropriate institutional distance. The personal warmth that had characterized previous celebrations would be replaced by ceremonial respect for royal protocol. King Charles had successfully navigated his first major constitutional crisis as monarch, establishing precedents that would serve future reigns. The personal cost had been substantial, but the institutional integrity of the crown had been preserved and strengthened. The monarchy would continue its thousand-year journey, sustained by the difficult decisions that placed constitutional duty above personal preference. The stunned silence that had greeted his decision had given way to respectful acknowledgement of necessary leadership. The Crown's resolution had demonstrated that even in the modern era, the fundamental principles of royal service remained unchanged and uncompromising.